Hi, happy Neon Day, obviously. I hope you guys are well. It's been a while. And I'm sorry in advance that this is not fancy and I'll edit it up, but just needed to get this one out fast and don't want to bother you guys before your big projects are due. So go to the outline I just posted on the Cold War to where it talks about now the second Red Scare. So same concepts as the first Red Scare. We know this. We know that people are reacting out of fear. We just watched our Twilight Zone episode. This is basically all of that come to life in a really big way. So why now? Two big events are going to cause this. Number one, the Soviets get an atomic bomb as well. And number two, China becomes communist. Now, going back to number one, it's not just that they have an atomic bomb and now they can blow us up like we can blow them up. It's that we're certain they stole the recipe from us. So that really now legitimately means where before it was more of a fear, now it is real. Spies are amongst us. They could be the person next door. They could be the person on Maple Street, right? So this whole idea that these people are around us, that there are communist spies in our country. And then we have this fear that now the most populated country in the world, which is China, has become communist. And remember, we had supported Chiang Kai-shek. We did not want this to happen. And now you have Mao Zedong, and now you have China as communist. And this freaks us out because this isn't containment, right? Communism is spreading, and it's not just spreading to like Cuba, which is going to be so small later on. It's spreading to China, right? Which is huge. So again, China was a place the Japanese had been, and it had been occupied, and it was one of those places that was then unstable after World War II. So there's a psychological concept called displacement, where you cannot really get upset with what's really wrong, but you take it out somewhere else. So these emotions we're going to have about the atomic bomb and about China, we don't take them out on China. We don't take them out on the USSR, but they're there and they're real and they're going to come out. So just like we saw on Maple Street, we take them out on each other. So this is where Joe McCarthy starts to work his dirty work. And first, HUAC is set up. Now in 1947, it was always there. It becomes bigger, and this is going to be called the House of Un-American Activities Committee. They're going to start to question people. They're going to start to make people testify. If you refuse, you're a communist. If you don't give up names, you're a communist. And this is where we have the famous Hollywood 10. All these different screenwriters, producers, all these people who are going to get put in jail and blacklisted from film. And if you guys have ever seen the movie Trumbo, it's all about this. Everybody's going to be testifying. Jackie Robinson, Arthur Miller. You have pianists from the Harlem Renaissance that are going to be testifying. This is like they were looking at everybody, especially celebrities, especially people in Hollywood, because the fear was they can reach large audiences, and America's obsessed with movies and television increasingly. So they have a lot of sway, right? So the government got really freaked out about this. Truman doesn't really want to go along with this. Truman is, a steady Eddie, and he thinks that this is ridiculous, but there's such intense fear. And we're going to see this again and again. These presidents at the time, whether they're big on this agenda like Nixon, or whether they're just a president during the Cold War, they're going to feel this pressure. They're going to feel the pressure of having to do something, and no one wants to appear weak on communism. So there is no compromise here. Every single person in the government is going to be investigated. Over 3 million people. So you can imagine very, very few people. There's little evidence that it's there. But again, every single time, people's reputations are being ruined. People's social circle, who your kids are going to play with, who you're friends with, all that stuff gets compromised. And afterwards, we're like, oh, oops, yeah, I guess we really didn't have a lot of communist threats, but they just bulldoze people's reputations as they go, and we know these people don't really have a chance to defend themselves, because as soon as that accusation is out there, what is there to say? Someone just called you a communist, which was almost as good as being a communist. It wasn't fair, it wasn't logical, but that's how it went. You see obsession with this in the media too. All of our cartoons, this is when a lot of them start. They have major communist themes here. Whether they're Marvel or DC Comics, this is huge. You're going to see every James Bond film, every single time the bad guy's communist, like in every single James Bond movie. Sci-fi is going to be another genre that takes this on. We said the Blob is really like communism not be contained, right? So this is big. There's going to be the Smith Act, which said it was a crime to call for the overthrow of the government, and then on top of it, there's a court case very similar to Korematsu, very similar to Schenck, called Dennis versus U.S. And Dennis versus U.S. says, especially in, quote, a time of grave danger, it is a time where you don't have full free speech. So we know this theme by now, right? The McCarran Act is going to be a special board to investigate communists. Makes it illegal to plan for dictatorships and stuff like that. Truman tries to veto it. He says, we're acting like the people that we're trying to fight. We're acting like Stalin. We're acting like these dictators. And that's the voice of reason. It's like Steve in The Twilight Zone, right? No one wants to listen. And there is credible kind of ideas for this reasoning, and that's going to be that we do have spies amongst us. And like, you can't make this stuff up. There's going to be a guy whose name is Alger Hiss. That's an amazing spy name, by the way, right? Like, if you're going to be a spy, have the name Alger Hiss. Alger Hiss is going to testify that he's not a spy, and later on they search the grounds of his property. In an abandoned barn, in a hollowed out pumpkin, they find microfilm with pictures from inside our government. It's just like crazy. So he's convicted and imprisoned. Klaus Fuchs is another one. He leaks sketches of our atomic bomb to the Soviets. And then lastly, the most infamous, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. Her brother gave them up. They are going to be discovered to be the leader of this spy ring that, again, leaked the bomb information to the Soviets. And they refuse to name other people. They refuse to confess. And because of that, they are executed in 1953. So this is big. This is crazy. This has never happened to civilians before. I just had some people come in and offer me candy. Now, usually if it's like a white van and it's strangers, you say no, but I knew them, so I feel like it's okay. All right, so now let's talk about McCarthy. Joe McCarthy, this fearmonger, right? This nobody from Wisconsin who is a representative. He was never a big deal. And now we said the perfect stage is set, right? You have this perfect stage for fear. We don't have evidence, but he has these wild accusations, and he is going to start to be the Palmer of his day. He's little known. And Richard Nixon, too. Richard Nixon, this is how he's going to get his start. He's going to be screaming about communism from the top of his lungs. So just like we said today, it's like the Salem witch trials. He doesn't have evidence. He's no better than Abigail Parrish, right? Screaming about it's so-and-so, it's so-and-so. But the fear is so real that we have that we believe him. And we're going to have that paranoia. And again, if you stand in the way and you say, hey, I'm here, this is ridiculous, this is dumb, you are totally seen as a communist next, right? So no one really stands in his way. And he gets this evidence too, and we're going to talk about that. He would have like pieces of paper in his hand and pretend to read names off of them. And that's different than someone saying, oh, like I've heard of these people or I think I know them. He takes maps, he takes doctored photos. There was a guy he didn't like, and it's before Photoshop. So he literally cuts the head off of his photo and pastes it in like a picture of this communist organization. And people believed it. This is crazy. And of course, we look back in retrospect and say, oh my goodness, he was such a sensationalist. How are we so stupid? But again, what about that fallout? Like they talked about in the Twilight Zone episode. Not just nuclear fallout, the fallout of friends and relationships and jobs and having to move and being pushed out of America, being discredited, and how that feels, what your life is like after that. It's so unfair. And again, how does this happen without our paranoia? Someone like McCarthy can never be, right? So it's going to be because of him. I want to talk about the Korean War next. So that's section 4, last part in this. The Korean War is all about our fear of communism. And if we look at Korea before World War II, they were occupied again by Japan. So we just talked about China being communist, who was occupied by Japan. And now Korea afterwards, all the Allied troops are there. And again, we divided stuff up the same way we did in other places like Germany. Except this time, we just divided between us and the USSR. So in North Korea, that's going to be controlled by the Soviet Union. South Korea is going to be controlled by us. And again, the USSR is like, oh, we can't get involved in the South Pacific, everything else. And they're like, zoop, they go right to Korea. They are all about being there, all about having their military. So in North Korea, soon Kim Il-sung, who we know his relatives today are still in charge, they are going to be kind of the front person that the USSR puts up. In South Korea, where the United States are, there is a democratic government under the leadership of a guy whose name is Syngman Rhee. Now, Syngman Rhee is pretty terrible. And even though he is elected, he's going to run his country like a dictatorship. So they're divided along this line that's called the 38th parallel in the middle. So you have north, south, and the 38th parallel is in between, dividing them, right? And the idea is stabilize these regions, don't hang around for a long time. Once they're stable, we'll pull out. They will have their own governments. But it looks like Kim Il-sung has way too much power. So we do not want him to have a united Korea under communism. And we start to think, oh my goodness, we can't let this happen. Stalin starts to supply the North with tanks and guns and Soviet weapons and everything else. And then in June 25th of 1950, what we think happens is going to happen. Kim Il-sung invades South Korea, huge attack force. We are totally surprised. We are shoved out completely. We have to go all the way to Japan. And it goes now to the UN, because that's how things work. We make this international decision. And the UN says we should have a police force of troops, 40,000 troops. Now, those troops are really all just ours. And again, this is the beginning of wars where we don't really declare war, but we're hanging out, and we're there. Is it a war? Is it not? It's called one. There are soldiers. They belong to us. They are dying. We're fighting for something. Looks like a war to me, but we don't call it that. And MacArthur, who we're going to talk about tomorrow, MacArthur, remember him from the Philippines in World War II, he is going to be in charge initially. So again, why Korea? We are terrified that if we don't deal with Korea, there's, quote, many more Koreas down the road. That's what Truman says. And again, it's this fear. It's this sticking to containment. It's that we don't want it to spread. And this is the beginning of us getting involved in foreign affairs because of communism. We are going to do this in Vietnam. We are going to do this again and again and again. Today, take out communism, put in terrorism, right? Where is terrorism? Are we getting involved? Yes, right? So same kind of concept. And again, as we said in class, these are such tough calls to make. Is this our place or not? Are these places we should send soldiers or not? So war is going to wage. The UN is not doing well. And again, the UN is going to be fighting, and they are going to have these troops come in. They're pushed all the way back down again. And then MacArthur's going to make this very daring landing, and he is going to have this big fight back in October of 1950, and we eventually recover all of North Korea. And now there's this Icarus-type question. Do we keep going? Do we fly too close to the sun? Do we pass the 38th parallel? Do we try to make all of South Korea and North Korea all now democratic? Of course, the answer from any fairy tale is like, no, don't do it, stay, don't be greedy. But we do it. We keep going. When this happens, we wake up the sleeping giant that is China. China now storms in to help North Korea, sends all of these troops, all these weapons, and pushes us all the way back down again. MacArthur says, hey, Truman, give me more atomic bombs. Truman says no, and you're going to see how MacArthur is fired, and we're going to talk about that and the drama behind that when he's fired. A guy named Ridgway comes in January 51. We take South Korea back. So that fighting is going to stop. Eventually, we have things, first it's border disputes and all that stuff, but eventually, in 53, 2 years later, we are going to have finally an armistice, and the fighting is going to stop. And Sigmund Rhee doesn't want to lose control, so he doesn't get up the prisoners because he's a shady dictator anyways. There's all different reasons why you have this bitter bouts of fighting, continued civilian deaths, all this stuff. And then finally, Eisenhower gets elected, and he is elected as a peace candidate. He is elected saying, I'm going to end this war. And again, this is a big deal that he goes to Korea to visit these guys. He goes to Korea to visit the soldiers, and people do that today still. So my big question is, what has changed in Korea? The answer is nothing. Before it was north-south. We fought. We had all these men, all these deaths, all this, oh my goodness, is it going to spread? And now the war is over. What did we accomplish? Nothing much. So that's why Korea is known as the Forgotten War. It's in the shadow of World War II. We don't really know what it accomplished. The map looks exactly the same. We still have a communist, very terrifying North Korean government today. We still have South Korea more or less under the threat of them. So we could talk about this stuff in 1953 and talk about it today, and it's not that different. What did change? Staggering loss of human life. 37,000 American troops are dead. 60,000 UN troops besides ours dead. 2 million communist casualties, and the saddest story of all is going to be all those civilians that are caught in the crossfire. You're going to have 3 million people from North and South Korea who are civilians who are killed. So Korea is going to be very similar down the road to Vietnam, except Vietnam is just going to be on an even more devastating scale. So we will talk about this tomorrow more. I'll show you guys some pictures, but that is the quick and dirty version of the Second Red Scare and the Korean War. I will see you tomorrow. It's Friday. It's my birthday. Bye.